All right, now let's get to that top story. Since Friday evening, Prime Minister Modi and the Chinese President Xi have bonded over a tour of the temples of Mamallapuram, followed by cultural programs and dinner that sources say that went well beyond the scheduled time. And after delegation-level talks this morning, India and China have agreed to build a new mechanism to discuss trade, investment and services. The two leaders also shared concerns over terrorism, recognized the importance of continuing to make joint efforts to ensure that the international community strengthens the framework against training, financing and supporting terror groups throughout the world and on a non-discriminatory basis.
From the Wuhan spirit to the Chennai vision, with the stunning setting of the beach behind them, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi tried to iron out the wrinkles in the India-China relationship, first in one-on-one talks and then with their delegations. The Prime Minister spoke of the trust built after last year's informal summit in Wuhan and the need to be sensitive to each other's concerns, while President Xi said their discussions had been candid.
हमने तय किया था कि हम मतभेद को प्रूडेंटली मैनेज करेंगे और डिस्प्यूट नहीं बनने देंगे, एक दूसरे के कंसर्न के बारे में सेंसिटिव रहेंगे। आज के हमारे चेन्नई कनेक्ट से दोनों देशों के बीच सहयोग का एक नया दौर शुरू होगा।
Indeed, the Wuhan summit ushered China-India relations into a new stage of healthy and steady development. China and India are each other's important neighbor. Yesterday and earlier today, Mr. Prime Minister, as you said, you and I have engaged in candid discussions as friends.
The two leaders spent just under 24 hours at this coastal town of Mamallapuram in an informal setting, touring monuments and watching dance performances. All this, officials say, helped them to talk freely and openly on key issues concerning them.
After the talks, India said Kashmir was not discussed and announced that both sides had agreed to set up a new mechanism on trade. The trade deficit is a big issue of concern. The PM also talked about RCEP, a regional free trade agreement which the RSS is not in favor of but which the government is considering.
Prime Minister specifically said in this regard that India looks forward to this, but that it is important that RCEP is balanced, that a balance is maintained between trade in goods, trade in services and investment. China is ready to take sincere action in this regard and to discuss in a very concrete way how to reduce the trade deficit. A new mechanism will be established to discuss trade, investment and services. This will be at an elevated level. From the Chinese side, it will be the Vice Premier. His name is Mr. Hu Chunhua. From the Indian side, it will be the Finance Minister of India, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman.
Ties in the run-up to this summit had been strained, especially over China's stand on Jammu and Kashmir. And while those fundamental problems remain, Modi and Xi have once again tried to manage the relationship. In Mamallapuram, with Sam Daniel, Saurabh Chakravarti for NDTV.
So has that relationship been managed? What is the significance of this informal summit? What has been achieved by both sides? To discuss all of this, we have joining us today Atul Neja, Associate Editor for China for the Hindu, joining us from Beijing. We have K. Shankar Bajpai, former ambassador to China, India's ambassador to China, Kalyani Ankule, Director of the International Affairs and Global Initiatives at the Jindal Global University, and Ajay Shukla, defense analyst. Ajay, to you first, the MEA had made it clear, no specific outlines, no MOUs, no agreements, so the media should tamp down expectations, and that is, the new format of these informal summits. It breaks away from protocol-bound bilateral meetings. So then, at the end of the last 24 hours, what have we achieved?
You're talking to me?
Yes, Ajay.
Okay. They talked about these informal summits being the way to go, and that it was a wise decision and that they're looking forward to further plans for bilateral relations and so on. But I'm a bit puzzled by what the actual outcomes and concrete benefits to India have been. In fact, I see no change or no measure taken by China that has improved India's security or economic concerns vis-a-vis China so far. Not one soldier has been able to be withdrawn from the border. Not 1 kilometer of border dispute is anywhere closer to being resolved. We continue to cater for a two-front war. And worst of all, 3 days ago, after meeting Prime Minister Imran Khan, Xi Jinping let it be known that they actually backed Pakistan's core concerns, which means that they backed its position on Kashmir. So from a position of neutrality, China has actually moved to a position of openly backing Pakistan on Kashmir. One would wonder after a statement like that whether it was even worth going for the summit at all or whether it should be called off. But at the very least, India should have come up with a very strong statement. But instead, we are going ahead with this summit with all those lavish feasts and walks along the beach. And I think the message that China's leadership will walk away with is that India is interested only in the optics. As long as the optics are good, the substantives don't really matter. And, you know, they've invited Modi for yet another summit. Whether that will happen and what will be the outcomes of that, I'm not very optimistic going by what happened today.
All right, but many would say, you know, Wuhan was landmark because it was credited to have turned around relations after Doklam. And similarly, we're having another informal summit. Ambassador Vajpayee, would you agree? What would you say the assessments are, considering that this Chennai is now following post-Kashmir?
Oh, forgive me, all of you on the news channels need to have highlight news. May I request you to look at this in a much deeper and wider perspective. All the points just made by the previous commentator are perfectly valid. It's very easy to inflate this event and it's very easy to tear it down. I would strongly advise you all to read last week's Fortune magazine, which shows that the Chinese economy has now produced 129 of the top 500 Fortune companies as against America's 120. So it has already overtaken the United States. That 4 of the top 10 banks are Chinese. The technological advances, we all know the military position. In short, what I'm trying to bring out is that the power of the Chinese Republic is now so great compared to ours that for the first time in history, we have a really powerful neighbor. And it's not always clear what its intentions towards us are. We need to apprehend many wrong things happening. And the only thing that we can do to prepare for that or to fend it off is to make ourselves as strong as possible. And until we can do that, events like this are necessary to keep the ball rolling. So I would advise all of you, please, and as I think wise for all of us, it's a very right thing that our government has done. You have to keep the ball rolling.
So keep channels of communication open, but perhaps, Ambassador, what you're saying explains and answers the point that Ajay raised as to why we went ahead with this informal summit despite everything that's happened over the last week, everything that's happened at the UN, the meeting with Imran Khan and the statements we heard coming out after that meeting. So, Kalyani, let's talk about the economics right now. India's economy not doing as well as this government would like. So certainly an imbalance over here, and an imbalance when it comes to trade is what India has been hoping to address. Have we gotten anything, when you look at the fine print of what was said by both sides, when it comes to the economy, India wanting to balance out our trade relationship, have we heard anything positive from China on that front?
First of all, I agree with Ambassador Vajpayee that it's quite promising to see the India-China dialogue transcend the traditional border issues and hardcore security issues and move on to issues such as trade and counterterrorism. to address your question specifically about the economy, I think while there are Indian interests in pursuing economic diplomacy at the bilateral level, I would say that the stake is equally high for the Chinese government to be invested in India and to have a good trade partnership with India. And so in this bilateral dialogue, it's good to see that both sides have not missed the opportunity to transcend certain conventional issues and focus attention on matters of economy and counterterrorism, where there is rather more scope for cooperation.
All right, and Atul, first I want to just check with you, what has the coverage been like in the Chinese press of this visit? What has China hoped to achieve? As Kalyani points out, China also wanted to get certain achievements when it comes to the economy. What has the press been like in the Chinese media, the coverage in terms of the coverage of this informal summit?
The coverage has been pretty extensive because you can see that the China state, actually I'm sorry, but there's a lot of echo, so I'm finding it difficult to carry forward this, but let me try again. Yeah, I think it's better now. Yeah, so what I was saying was that there has been good coverage on the Chinese television, which is the CCTV 13, which is the Chinese news channel. That has given extensive coverage with a lot of visuals of yesterday's events as well as of today. Then there have been commentaries in the Global Times, and as well as Xinhua has come out with, again, a very positive report on the interaction which took place yesterday, but skirting away all contentious issues and talking about the bigger picture of how a geo-economic and a geopolitical relationship between India and China is important at a global level. So they're not gone into specifics, but as far as optics and coverage is gone about the visit, it has made headlines, and it has been the top story till the time President Xi landed in Kathmandu. That was the last one I saw, because then the story moved from there.
And of course, the story then moves on to Nepal.
So is
that also now a thorn in the India-China relationship? At least China now arriving in Nepal, bearing gifts, bearing investments, and that's something India is going to be watching warily.
No, I just want to contextualize this particular visit a little more. Ajay mentioned about Imran Khan's visit. I think that lays down part of the context, because this was not just Imran Khan coming to China, but also Qamar Javed Bajwa, the army chief,
correct,
and as well as the ISI chief, General Faiz Hamid. So, the Chinese wanted to hear out from the Pakistanis what exactly they had in mind. They were literally summoned by the Chinese leadership before President Xi traveled to India. So China did a stock taking of what the Pakistanis have to say. The other element which comes in the Pakistani visit is that the sense I got was that the first time the Chinese, who have been very peeved with the Quad strategy of India, especially the raising it of the level of the foreign ministers at the UNGA, I think they had a message that if India goes forward with the Quad, then the relationship with Pakistan is going to get further consolidated. Xi Jinping wants to engage India 360 degrees, no doubt, but at the same time, there's a plan B, that if geopolitically India goes and pursues a strategy which can be interpreted or is perceived as a containment of China, then there are cards, the Pakistani card is going to be played. So it's a very delicate geopolitical context in which this particular meeting took place. And I think if you got to give a positive direction to it, it cannot be given by the bureaucrats, it cannot be given at a lower level, it has to be given right at the level of the top leaders. So I think it was vital, it was crucially important that the two met here and did a course correction, because things were really going downhill.
Ajay Shukla, is this a course correction, or is this where India has landed because of its own doing? Because when Prime Minister Modi was in the US, when we saw that bonhomie between him and President Trump in Houston, at that visit is when we saw the upgrading of this Quad alliance to ministerial level. And now Atul and Neja are saying possibly that's why China then crossed the line when it mentioned, Kashmir at the UN.
Well, you know, it's hard to tell with the relationship with President Trump. You remember the Chinese relationship began with that Mar-a-Lago summit. That did not lead anywhere. They entered into a trade war pretty soon after that. So it's hard to read what President Trump's actions actually mean in the medium and long term.
But the closeness between Donald Trump and Prime Minister Modi, is that why we're seeing the responses that we heard from China at the UN? Or is that just simplifying things too much?
I think that there was not a direct connection. I would make the connection more between India's steps taken in Kashmir and the transformation of Ladakh into a centrally controlled union territory. As you know, China sort of has claims over the Aksai Chin, which is a part of the Ladakh union territory. So I think the UN claims and the position of support to Pakistan is governed more by what India is doing in Kashmir than merely India's relationship with Trump. Of course, there is that context as well. The closer India gets to the UN, to the US, China on the one hand gets wary and is incentivized to give more to India, but at the same time it signals that if India gets any closer or gets too close or goes for mechanisms like the Quad, then there would be a price to pay as well. So there's a balancing that is taking place, and you've got to remember that there are many balls in play over here.
Many balls in play. Ambassador Bajpai, so did China, China did cross, let me put it that way, the Indian red line of internationalizing the Kashmir issue in support of Pakistan at the UN Security Council. But that, the fact that we're having this informal summit post all of that shows pragmatism by, you know, for Prime Minister Modi and the Modi administration.
I didn't quite catch the question.
I'm asking you, coming after the statements that we heard from China internationalizing Kashmir at the UN, the fact that the Modi administration, Prime Minister Modi, went ahead with this informal summit, which the dates would have been fixed much earlier, shows pragmatism.
Well, but what China has said in regard to Kashmir is nothing new. We've had to live with that for a very long time. I think we have to realize that China is not only a willing but an eager tool for China, and Pakistan will continue to be useful, and therefore China will always stand beside Pakistan, and we have learned to live with that. We can't keep being just protesting against it. As I said earlier, we have to mark time or keep the ball rolling, whatever metaphor you like, until we have been able to make ourselves the strong nation which alone can cope with the international challenges, of which the rise of China should be the organizing principle of our international security program. And that is what I think this government is trying to do.
Okay, and Kalyani, then to you, whenever India has raised terrorism with China, the underlying current has been that New Delhi hopes that China would push Pakistan to act on the matter. But this time round, we're hearing the MEA saying that Kashmir certainly was not raised, and Pakistan, the visit by Imran Khan was raised by China, but there were no comments on this. Prime Minister Modi just listened. Your reaction to that?
So I've said on your channel before that for a long time in India there has been a kind of willful ignorance of Chinese red lines and bottom lines when it comes to diplomacy. I think this summit has gone some way, following the Wuhan summit, of course, in addressing that lack. Understand that India and China are now cooperating on the counterterrorism issue, not just at the bilateral level, but at the multilateral level as well, through across various Asian fora. I would say that the one thing that seems to be lacking is an infusion of people-to-people contact, which we have seen happen over the years in the India-US context, but not so much in the India-China India-China relationship. There remain various outstanding outstanding visa-related issues, which, for instance, need to be addressed on the Indian side. And that's definitely something that strikes me, in addition to high-level diplomacy and summit diplomacy, an area that needs a lot of work.
All right. Well, then, thank you so much, all of you, for joining us tonight. Until the next summit, Premier Xi suggests that informal summits are the way to go, the way of the future. They've invited India, and India has accepted. So, until then, thank you all for joining us.